White farmer gave his worst land to his black son, but 10 months later, he nearly fainted when he saw. Frank Miller felt the ground vanish beneath his feet when the young man spread the documents across the kitchen table. At 62, the farmer had built his reputation as an honorable man in Oak Ridge, in the countryside of New York City, but those papers revealed a secret he thought was buried forever. "My name is Marcus Johnson," said the 25-year-old, his voice steady but respectful. "I'm your son." Frank stared at the broad-shouldered young black man with calloused hands, searching for any resemblance to himself. His wife, Eileen, had gone pale and leaned against the doorframe, immediately recognizing the features of the man she had secretly loved so many years ago. "This can't be true," Frank murmured, but his voice trembled. Marcus placed certificates, DNA tests, and a yellowed letter on the table. It was all true. 26 years ago, when Eileen was still single, she had worked as a teacher in a neighboring town. There she met Terence Brown, a farmhand who dreamed of owning his own land. The romance lasted only a few months, but bore fruit. When she discovered the pregnancy, Eileen was already engaged to Frank. Desperate, she told the truth to her mother, Mrs. Gladys, who convinced her to give the child up for adoption right after birth. Frank never knew, and she had carried that weight silently all these years. "Why show up now?" Frank asked, still trying to process the information. "My adoptive father passed away last year. Before he left, he told me the truth and gave me these documents. He said I had the right to know my roots." Marcus replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not here for money, sir. I came for answers." Eileen cried silently, remembering the baby she had been forced to give away. Frank felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and something he couldn't quite name. His reputation, his marriage, everything was being shaken by this young man who had appeared out of nowhere. "What do you want?" he asked sharply. "A chance, an opportunity to work and prove my worth," Marcus answered without hesitation. Frank looked out the window at his prosperous land. 500 acres of fertile soil, passed down from father to son for 3 generations. The idea of sharing it with a stranger, even if they shared blood, unsettled him deeply. Then he had a cruel idea. In the farthest corner of his property was a 5-acre plot that had always been a headache. The soil was rocky, dry, with little water. Nothing grew there right. It would be the perfect punishment. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll give you that plot at the edge of the property. Do you know how to work the land?" "I worked with my adoptive father since I was little. He was a farmer too." "Then prove you're my son by working. If you can get anything to grow on that land, maybe you deserve to be part of this family." Eileen wanted to protest, but her husband's stern look silenced her. Marcus nodded, thanked him, and left carrying only an old backpack and the determination he'd inherited from his adoptive father. In the days that followed, the news spread through the region like wildfire. The farm workers whispered about the young man who had appeared claiming to be the boss's son. Some pitied him, others thought it was a scam, but they all agreed on one thing. If it were true, Frank had been downright cruel. Old Bill, the farm's longest-serving worker, shook his head when he heard where the young man had been sent. "That land's cursed, Frank. Even weeds won't grow there." "That's the point," Frank muttered, trying to smother any guilt. Marcus pitched his tent in the middle of that barren ground. In the first few weeks, he would wake before sunrise and spend hours digging, trying to understand that soil. The stones seemed to sprout from the earth as if planted there. Water was scarce, and the little he managed to get from shallow wells came out brackish. The farm workers watched him from a distance. Some would secretly come to offer help, bringing borrowed tools or a bit of food. Marcus always thanked them politely but never complained about his situation. "That boy's got grit," remarked Mrs. Betty, the cook at the main farmhouse. "Works like an ant and never utters a word of complaint." Eileen would hear these comments and feel her heart tighten. At night when Frank was asleep, she'd stand by the window, gazing at the faint glow of the lantern shining far at the back of the property, where her son toiled tirelessly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, moving on. 3 months had passed when Marcus made his first important discovery. Digging deeper than usual, he found a layer of dark, moist soil that completely contrasted with the arid surface. It was as if someone had deliberately dumped sand and rocks over the good earth. Intrigued, he began investigating. He spoke with Old Bill during one of his secret visits to bring supplies. "Old Bill, do you remember what this land used to be like?" The old man scratched his grey beard, thoughtful. "Son, it's been a while. But I recall when I was young, this area was one of the best on the farm. Frank's grandfather used to grow corn here, and it was a sight to behold." "What happened?" "Ah, that was when Frank's father decided to try some new chemicals. Must have been about 20 years ago. Said it'd boost production, but it ruined everything. After that, nothing ever grew right here again." Marcus nodded, starting to understand. The land wasn't naturally bad. It had been damaged, but it still had potential. It just needed care and patience to recover. So began his meticulous restoration work. He removed the larger stones, dug deep beds, and mixed the good soil he found beneath with organic compost made from plant waste. First, he planted species that helped cleanse the soil, like sunflowers and velvet beans. Frank watched from afar on his horse, waiting to see the failure that would justify his cruelty. But something unsettled him. The boy didn't give up. He worked with a dedication even Frank recognized and respected. "Dad, this isn't right," said Jennifer, his 30-year-old daughter, who had returned from New York City where she worked as an agronomist. She had learned about the whole situation and couldn't hide her indignation. "Stay out of this, Jennifer. You don't understand." "Don't understand? Dad, I've seen the papers. He's my brother, and you treated him like some worthless laborer. On top of that, you gave him the worst land on the farm. If he's truly my son, he'll prove it through hard work. And if he fails, will you cast out your own blood?" Frank didn't answer, but his daughter's words troubled him. That night he struggled to sleep, remembering his own father, who had always been fair and generous to everyone. Meanwhile, Marcus made slow but steady progress. He discovered that an underground water vein ran beneath part of the land. With great effort, he dug a well that provided clean, abundant water. The news spread among the workers, who began to see him in a new light. "That boy's got a real knack," said old Joe, the equipment manager. "Found water where no one else could." The first seedlings began to sprout. They were small, fragile, but they carried hope. Marcus cared for them as if they were his own children, watering, protecting them from pests, talking to them just as his adoptive father had taught him. "Plants sense our energy, son," Terence Brown would say. "Treat them well and they'll reward you." Eileen, who could no longer bear the weight on her conscience, began secretly sending help through Mrs. Betty. Better seeds, tools, even some fully grown seedlings, everything disguised as leftovers or things about to be thrown away. "Mrs. Betty, take these to Marcus," she'd say, trying to sound casual. "I was just going to toss them anyway." The cook understood the game and carried the gifts with grandmotherly affection. "Your mother loves you, boy," she once told him. "She can't show it, but she does." Marcus smiled sadly. He understood Eileen's difficult position, but he still longed for the maternal love he'd never known. 6 months after his arrival, Marcus's plot began showing remarkable signs of recovery. Where there had once been only rocks and dry earth, neat rows of vegetables, corn, and even some young fruit trees now thrived. Frank Miller was riding across the property when he decided to pass by the area. What he saw left him puzzled. There was an orderliness he hadn't expected. Marcus had created a simple but effective irrigation system using water from the well he'd dug and small channels to distribute it evenly. "How did he do this?" he murmured to himself. Dismounting, he stepped closer. Marcus was kneeling among the tomato plants, carefully removing pests by hand. When he noticed Frank's presence, he stood and tipped his hat in respect. "Mr. Miller, how did you get these plants to grow here?" Marcus wiped his hands on his pants before answering. The land just needed patience and care. Under all those rocks and sand, there was good soil. It just needed clearing and proper treatment. Frank looked around, noticing details he'd missed before. Raised beds for better drainage, organized compost piles, even a few beehives to attract pollinators. "Where did you learn all this?" from my adoptive father. He always said there's no such thing as bad land, only poorly treated land. The words hit Frank like a punch to the gut. His own father had often said something similar. It was as if an echo of his upbringing was coming back through this young man. That night, Frank barely touched his dinner. Eileen noticed his thoughtful expression. "What's wrong, Frank?" "I went to see how Marcus's work is coming along." "And how is it?" "Better than I expected," he admitted reluctantly. Eileen's heart raced. Was there hope for reconciliation? "Maybe you should help him more. He doesn't need help. He's managing on his own." But deep down, Frank was beginning to feel something he didn't want to admit: pride. That young man was showing a determination and skill few possessed. Months passed, and the transformation of Marcus's land became the talk of the region. Other farmers came to visit, curious to see how someone had worked miracles on land everyone had considered lost. "Mr. Miller, who's that young man working the far end of your property?" asked Hank, a neighboring farmer. "Folks are saying he's done something impressive out there." Frank dodged the questions, unsure how to explain. How could he admit he'd discovered he had a son and treated him cruelly? Jennifer, meanwhile, had become a frequent visitor to Marcus's plot. As an agricultural engineer, she was fascinated by his techniques. "Marcus, where did you learn about restoring degraded soil?" "Through practice with my adoptive father. He loved taking land others thought was ruined and bringing it back to life." "That's incredible. Have you ever thought of formalizing this knowledge?" Marcus laughed a bit awkwardly. "I barely finished high school, Jennifer. I don't have the education for these things." "Formal education you can get, but that practical wisdom you have is worth far more than any diploma." The friendship between the two siblings grew naturally, much to Frank's dismay, as he watched his daughter drift away from him and closer to the son he had rejected. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, winter arrived, and with it came a severe drought that affected the entire region. The wells on the main farm began to dry up, and the crops suffered. Frank woke up every morning worried, watching his plants wither day after day. Ironically, Marcus's area seemed to hold up better against the lack of rain. The well he had dug still provided water, and his plants, though smaller, remained green and healthy. "How is this possible?" Frank muttered, watching from a distance. Old Bill, who no longer hid his admiration for Marcus, explained, "The boy planted smart, Frank. Mixed the crops, planted shade trees, used mulch to keep the moisture in. It's an old method, but it works." Frank felt small. He, who considered himself an experienced farmer, was watching his crops struggle while a 25-year-old managed better results on land he himself had deemed worthless. The situation worsened when the bills started coming in. The drought had hurt production, and Frank's financial obligations were tightening. He had invested heavily in new equipment and pesticides, counting on a good harvest that wasn't happening. "Frank, we need to talk," Eileen said one night after he spent hours at the kitchen table crunching numbers. "It's nothing you need to worry about." "Of course I do. This farm has been our home for 30 years. If you're struggling, I want to help." Frank sighed, running his hands through his graying hair. "The bills are tight. The drought hit hard, and I was counting on a better yield." "And Marcus, how's he doing?" "Why do you want to know?" "Because he's our son, Frank. There's no use pretending he isn't." Eileen's words hung in the silence of the kitchen. It was the first time she had openly claimed Marcus as her own. "Our son?" Frank laughed bitterly. "He's your son with another man. I have nothing to do with that." "You do. You raised him, fed him, gave him shelter. He may not be your blood, but he's your son all the same." "He's not—" "Frank!" Eileen slammed her hand on the table, losing her patience for the first time in years. "Enough. You know he's a good boy. Hard-working, respectful, smart. Any father would be proud to have a son like that." "Then go be proud. I never asked for this." Eileen glared at him with a hardness he hadn't seen before. "You're being unfair, and you know it. That boy has never done you any harm. He just wanted a chance, and you gave him the worst land on the farm, hoping he'd fail. So what? He didn't fail. Exactly, he didn't fail. He took your bad land and turned it into a garden, and instead of feeling proud, you feel angry. Why? Frank didn't answer, but he knew why. He was angry because Marcus was proving he had been needlessly cruel. He was angry because that young man was a better man than he was being. The next morning, Frank woke up with a decision in mind. He would go to Marcus's plot and have a final talk. Either he'd kick the boy out for good, or he'd settle this once and for all. He found Marcus working even under the harsh midday sun. The young man was building a new fence around an area where he had planted fruit tree saplings. Marcus. Mr. Frank. Marcus straightened up, always respectful. We need to talk. Of course. Would you like to sit in the shade? Frank looked around and was surprised to see Marcus had created several shaded areas by planting trees in strategic spots. There was even a small bench made of logs. Did you do all this yourself? I had some help. Old Bill brought the saplings. Mrs. Betty gave me sunflower seeds. Frank realized Marcus had won over his workers, something that both bothered and impressed him. Sit here, Marcus gestured to the bench. Can I get you some fresh water? No need. The two sat in silence for a few minutes. Frank observed the neat rows of plants, the handmade irrigation system, the well-tended compost piles. Everything showed dedication and knowledge. Why didn't you give up? He finally asked. Marcus thought before answering. My adoptive father always said giving up is easy. What's hard is pushing forward when it seems impossible. He taught me the land always rewards those who are patient with it. Even knowing I gave you the worst land on the farm, Marcus looked him straight in the eye. I knew from day one, Mr. Frank. Anyone with farming experience could see that land had been mistreated, but I also saw that beneath all that damage, there was good soil waiting to be restored. And you weren't angry? I was sad. But anger doesn't plant anything, doesn't harvest anything. I decided to use that sadness as fuel to work. Frank felt even smaller. This young man had understood his cruelty and instead of retaliating, had chosen to turn it into something positive. Marcus, he began but couldn't continue. You don't have to say anything. I understand your position. I showed up out of nowhere, disrupting everyone's lives. I don't expect to be accepted overnight. But you hope to be? I hope to earn that right, by working, by proving I'm worth it. Frank looked at the young man's calloused hands, his sunburned face, the determination in his eyes. It was impossible not to see the value there. You've done it, he said finally. You turned that land into something beautiful. The land was always good, Mr. Frank. It just needed care. Like people, huh? Marcus smiled for the first time in front of Frank. Like people. At that moment, something broke in Frank's chest. 30 years of wounded pride, bottled up resentment, fear of showing weakness. For the first time, he looked at Marcus not as a threat, but as what he truly was, a brave young man who deserved respect. Want to see the rest of the farm? Frank asked. Really? Really? You're part of the family. It's time you saw what could be yours one day, too. Marcus felt his eyes well up but kept his emotions in check. I'd like that very much. The two rose from the bench and began walking across the property. Frank pointed out each area, explaining the history of every crop, sharing knowledge he'd held onto for years. This area here is good for corn. That one up there is better for pasture. The cattle love the grass that grows there. Marcus listened intently, asking smart questions, suggesting ideas that impressed Frank. Have you ever thought about diversifying more? Planting different crops together? How do you mean? It's a technique my adoptive father taught me, called intercropping. You plant crops that help each other. Corn supports the beans fix nitrogen in the soil for the corn, and underneath you can plant squash, which protects the soil from erosion. Frank stopped walking and looked at Marcus with genuine admiration. That really works? It does. And it saves space, water, and fertilizer. Plus, it makes the soil healthier. Why didn't you tell me this before? You never asked. Frank laughed. For the first time in months, It was a genuine laugh, free of bitterness. Touché. They continued their walk, and Frank found himself imagining what it would be like to work alongside Marcus. The young man had fresh ideas, energy, and clearly understood farming just as well as he did, maybe even better in some ways. When they returned to the main house, Eileen was on the porch. She saw the two of them arriving together, talking, and her heart swelled with hope. "How was the walk?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Enlightening," Frank replied. "Marcus has some interesting ideas for the farm." "I bet he does," Eileen smiled at her son. "Will you stay for dinner?" Marcus glanced at Frank, uncertain. "You can stay," Frank said. "Tonight, you eat with family." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Dinner was awkward at first. Jennifer was overjoyed to see her father and brother finally talking. Eileen worked hard to keep the conversation flowing, but there was still so much left unsaid between them all. "Marcus, tell us about your adoptive father," Jennifer asked. "His name was Terrence Brown. He was a simple man, but wise. He took in abandoned kids to raise. I was one of them." "How did he manage to support you all?" Eileen asked, genuinely interested. "He worked as a sharecropper on different farms, and he had a special way with the land, always managed to get a good yield, even from the toughest soil." "Just like you," Frank observed. "I learned everything from him. He used to say farming was like raising a child. It takes love, patience, and consistency." The words brought an uncomfortable silence. Frank caught the unintended jab, even if Marcus hadn't meant it that way. "Marcus," he finally said, "I owe you an apology." "Mr. Frank, no. Let me speak. I treated you poorly from day one. I gave you that terrible plot hoping you'd fail and leave. It was cruel and unfair." Marcus lowered his eyes, moved. "I understand the shock it must have been for you. I don't hold a grudge." "But you should," Eileen said, her voice trembling. "I abandoned you, Marcus. I didn't have the courage to fight for my own son." "Mrs. Eileen, call me Mom," she interrupted, tears in her eyes. "Please, I know I don't deserve it, but—" Marcus got up from his chair and went to her, kneeling beside her seat. "Mom," he said, embracing her, "I've always dreamed of this moment." Eileen wept as she hadn't in years, holding the son she'd lost and found again. Frank and Jennifer were just as moved by the scene. "I'm sorry, my boy," Eileen whispered. "Sorry for everything." "No need to apologize, Mom. What matters is we're together now." That night marked a turning point for the Miller family. Marcus didn't return to his tent. He slept in the guest room Eileen had prepared with a mother's care. For the first time in 10 months, he slept in a real bed, on clean sheets, knowing he finally had a family. But the challenges weren't over. In the days that followed, Frank faced the farm's financial reality. The debts were worse than he'd admitted, and creditors were starting to pressure him. "Dad, the situation is bad," Jennifer said after reviewing the numbers. "If you can't pay off at least part of the debt by year's end, you could lose the farm." "No!" Frank slammed his fist on the table. "This land stays in the family. My grandfather built this place with his own hands. Then you need a miracle with the next harvest." Marcus, who had overheard, had an idea. "Mr. Frank, can I make a suggestion?" "Of course. What if we apply the techniques I used in my area to other parts of the farm? It could increase productivity and lower costs. Do you think it'll work?" "I'm sure of it. And there's more. With the right techniques, we can start producing organic crops. The market pays much better for pesticide-free products." Frank Miller considered the proposal. It was risky to change methods he'd used for decades, but it was just as risky to stay on the path that was leading him to bankruptcy. How long would it take to see results? A few months. It won't happen overnight, but the results will be solid. "And would you be willing to work with me on this?" Marcus smiled. "I'd be willing to work with my dad on anything." The word dad still sounded strange to Frank's ears, but for the first time it didn't bother him. Instead, it brought a sense of pride he hadn't expected to feel. "Then let's give it a try." The following months were intense. Marcus taught Frank and the workers the sustainable farming techniques he'd learned from Terrence Brown. They started small, converting just a few areas, but the results came quickly. The plants grew healthier, the soil regained its natural fertility, and chemical costs dropped drastically. Most importantly, they secured organic certification for part of their produce, allowing them to sell at much better prices. "Dad, the numbers are improving," Jennifer announced excitedly after 3 months of the new system. "Productivity is up 20% and costs are down 15%. And this is just the beginning," Marcus said. "As the soil recovers, the results will get even better." Frank looked over the reports with satisfaction. For the first time in months, he saw light at the end of the tunnel. But the real test came during the main harvest season. Frank, Marcus, and all the workers labored day and night to bring everything in on time. The quality of the produce was exceptionally good, and buyers noticed the difference. "Mr. Miller, what did you do differently this year?" Old Joe, the co-op representative, asked. "The quality is outstanding." "We changed some methods," Frank replied proudly. "My son Marcus brought in some new techniques." It was the first time he'd referred to Marcus as his son in public, and the young man felt his heart race with emotion. The harvest was a complete success. Not only did they pay off the most pressing debts, but there was even money left to invest in farm improvements. "You did it," Jennifer said at a family meeting. "The farm is saved." "We did it," Frank corrected, looking at Marcus. "It was a team effort." "Dad, there's something I'd like to propose," Marcus said. "Go ahead. What if we set up a training program? Teach other farmers in the area the techniques we've used here. It could be extra income and help the community." Frank considered the idea. It was ambitious, but it made sense. "Would you be willing to lead it?" "I would, but I'd want to do it with you. Your experience combined with what I've learned could help a lot of people." "Son," Frank said, and this time the word came naturally. "It'd be an honor to work with you on this." The months that followed brought deep changes for the family and the region. The training program Marcus proposed became a success, drawing farmers from nearby towns eager to learn sustainable techniques. Frank discovered he enjoyed teaching, and his decades of experience perfectly complemented Marcus's knowledge. Together, they formed an effective team that transformed not just their own farm, but the entire local agriculture. "You're revolutionizing the area," the mayor of Oak Ridge said during an official visit. "Other towns are trying to copy your model." "That's the whole idea," Marcus replied. "Sustainable farming only works when everyone's on board. It doesn't help if one farm is organic while the neighbor's polluting the groundwater." Eileen watched her son's success with a mother's pride. She was making up for lost years, caring for him the way she'd always dreamed. She cooked his favorite meals, washed his clothes, and gave him advice like the experienced mother she was. "Mom, you don't have to do all this," Marcus said, watching her fold his shirts. "Oh, but I do. I've got 25 years of missed mothering to catch up on." Jennifer also blossomed in the new family dynamic. Having a brother made her feel more complete, and she loved working with Marcus on the farm's technical projects. "Marcus, have you ever thought about going to college?" she asked one day. "I have, but I'm not sure I've got the head for studying after so long away from books." "Nonsense, you've got incredible practical smarts. Add a little theory and you'll be unstoppable." The idea took root, and with his family's support, Marcus enrolled in the entrance exams for agronomy at a nearby university. He studied at night after work, with Jennifer helping him through the tougher subjects. "Son, don't run yourself ragged studying," Frank advised. "You've already proven your worth through hard work." "Dad, education matters. I want to do even more for the farm and the training programs." Frank smiled, hearing that. Marcus had become everything he could have wanted in a son: hard-working, smart, ambitious, but always down to earth. 2 years after his arrival, Marcus aced the entrance exams with one of the top scores. The whole family celebrated like it was a shared victory. "I'm proud of you, son," Frank said, hugging him. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for giving me a chance, for believing in me, for teaching me so much. You're the one who taught me. You showed me there's no such thing as bad land, only neglected land, and no such thing as a bad son, only a father who fails to see his worth." They both laughed, remembering the rocky start to their relationship. The farm kept thriving. What was once 500 acres of traditional monoculture had become a diverse, sustainable operation that set the standard for the region. Marcus balanced college with farm work and the training courses he taught alongside Frank. "You two are proof that family farming can be both modern and sustainable," said a visiting professor. "The secret is blending tradition with innovation," Frank explained. "My son taught me that." The bond between father and son had grown so strong, it was hard to believe they'd ever clashed. They worked together as if born for it, complementing each other perfectly. Eileen, seeing the family's harmony, finally let herself be truly happy. After decades carrying the weight of secrecy and guilt, she could finally be the mother she'd always wanted to be. "Marcus, do you really forgive me for leaving you?" she asked during a quiet moment between them. "Mom, there's nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was best. And look how it all turned out. I had a good childhood with Hank, learned important things, and now I'm here with you. Everything happened the way it was supposed to. You're wise, my boy. I learned from the best, from Terrence Brown, who raised me with love, and from all of you, who welcomed me back after so long." Life moved forward. Marcus graduated with honors in agronomy, presenting his thesis on restoring degraded soil based on his family farm's experience. The work was so well received that he was invited to speak at national conferences. "Son, you're getting famous," Frank joked. "It's the farm that's getting famous, Dad. And that's good for everyone, and it truly was." The training program had grown so much that they'd had to hire more instructors. The farm welcomed visitors from all over the country, eager to learn the techniques being developed there. Jennifer also thrived, taking over the administrative management of the company they'd built around the trainings. She organized the courses, handled finances, and developed partnerships with universities and government agencies. "We're a family of entrepreneurs," she'd say proudly. 5 years after Marcus arrived, the farm had become a national reference in sustainable agriculture. What had started as a cruel punishment had turned into salvation, not just for the property, but for the entire region's farming. "Dad, there's something I've always wanted to ask," Marcus said one afternoon as they rested on the porch. "What is it? Why did you choose that exact piece of land to give me? The worst one of all?" Frank sighed, a little ashamed to admit it. "Because I wanted you to fail. I wanted you to give up and leave." "And why did you change your mind?" "Because you taught me a lesson I'd forgotten. My father always said a man's worth isn't in what he's given, but in what he does with it. You took the worst land and turned it into the best. That showed me the kind of man you are. And now, do you regret taking me in?" Frank looked at his son, at the thriving land stretching as far as the eye could see, at the close-knit family they'd built. "Marcus, you were the best thing to happen to this family in decades. You didn't just save our farm, you saved us as a family. If I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing because it all led to this moment. Even the cruel part at the beginning. Especially the cruel part, because that's what revealed your true character. Anyone can be good when they're treated well, but you were good even when you were treated poorly. That made all the difference." Marcus smiled, gazing at the same land that 5 years earlier had been his punishment and was now his inheritance and future. "You know what makes me proudest, Dad?" "What?" "That we transformed that land together. It wasn't just me working a miracle, it was us, working as a family." "As a family," Frank repeated, liking the sound of the words. The two fell silent, watching the sunset paint the sky orange over the lush green fields. In the distance, Eileen hummed in the kitchen as she prepared dinner. Jennifer arrived from the city with news of new contracts and partnerships. It was a scene of peace and prosperity neither of them had imagined possible on that first difficult day, when Marcus had arrived with his papers and wounded pride, asking only for a chance. "Dad," Marcus said, "thank you for giving me the worst land." "Why?" "Because it gave me the chance to prove there's no such thing as bad land when there's love and dedication tending to it. And that goes for land, for family, for life itself." Frank nodded, understanding the depth of his son's words. "And thank you, son, for teaching me that what matters isn't what we give people, but what they do with what they're given." That evening, The Miller family dined together as they always did now, planning the future, sharing the day's successes, strengthening the bonds that had become unbreakable. Marcus had arrived as a stranger asking for recognition. Now he was the son who'd saved not just the farm, but the very heart of that family, proving that true love can flourish even in the driest soil as long as it's watered with patience, forgiveness, and determination. The land given as punishment had become the foundation of a new life for them all. And in those lush, green rows stretching all the way to the horizon, the most important lesson they had learned was forever etched: that no land is impossible for those who have faith, love, and the willingness to work hard for their dreams. The end of the story. And you? What did you think of this tale of perseverance and family reconciliation? Can you imagine Frank Miller's emotions seeing that transformation? Share in the comments which part touched you the most, and if you've ever experienced something similar. Leave a like if the story moved you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other incredible stories like this one.